The silent security alarm pulsed at 2:14 a.m., a crimson heartbeat flickering against the dark marble of Park Do-yoon's penthouse. He didn't reach for his phone. He reached for the custom Beretta on his nightstand. In his world, a breach at this hour meant a hit, a coup, or a reckoning. He moved through the shadows of the living room, a predator in his own territory. He caught the intruder near the floor-to-ceiling windows, a blur of tactical silk and lethal precision. They fought with a brutal, muffled violence, glass crunching under combat boots until Do-yoon pinned the assassin against the cold glass.
Who sent you?
He growled, his voice a blade of ice. The intruder remained silent, eyes burning with a terrifying, familiar defiance behind the mesh of a black tactical mask. Do-yoon reached up and ripped the mask away. Serena?
Serena?
The name died in his throat, the air turning to lead in his lungs. The world fractured. 5 years. It had been 5 long, hollow years since he'd stood over a charred wreck, since he'd watched the black smoke of a car bomb spiral into the Seoul sky, taking the only woman he'd ever loved with it. 5 years of haunting the city like a ghost. 5 years of burning down rival syndicates in a blood-soaked tribute to her memory, of building walls of power, and stone so thick even his own conscience couldn't scale them. And now, the dead was breathing beneath him. "I buried you," he whispered, his hand trembling as he stared at the face he'd memorized in his dreams. His grip on her fractured, his heart hammering against his ribs, like it was trying to break free from 5 years of grief. 6 years earlier, Serena Blackwell had learned early that in the elite world of private security, a black woman had to be twice as fast and 10 times as lethal to earn a seat at the table. At 27, she was a top-tier tactical specialist, a woman who could dismantle a weapon, or a man, in under 4 seconds. She had her discipline, her father's dog tags around her neck, and a focus that could cut through the loudest chaos. The Park Syndicate wasn't just any client. Everyone in the global underground knew it belonged to Do-yoon, the Ice King of the East, a man whose business was as lethal as it was lucrative. Serena knew the rumors, saw the way even seasoned mercenaries lowered their voices when his name was mentioned, and knew that protecting a man with so many enemies was a death sentence waiting to happen. But the contract was the chance of a lifetime, the work was her calling, and she had navigated dangerous waters since she was a child. She never expected to collide, literally, with the man she was paid to protect. Do-yoon was used to bowing heads and averted eyes. In the hierarchy of the Park Syndicate, he was the sun, and everyone else was a satellite orbiting his gravity. But when Serena Blackwell walked into the obsidian-tiled hall of his Seoul compound 6 years ago, she didn't bow. She stood like a spear, sharp, balanced, and ready to pierce. "The firm says she is the best tactical mind they've ever produced," his lead advisor had whispered. "An expert in close-quarters combat and evasive driving. She'll be your primary shadow." Do-yoon had adjusted his silk tie, his gaze raking over the woman in the charcoal gray tactical suit. She was a striking contrast to the sea of identical men in black who usually guarded him. Her eyes were clinical as she scanned the grand foyer, noting the exits, the camera blind spots, and finally him. She didn't look at his expensive watch or the power he wore like a second skin. She looked at his throat, his hands, and his stance, as if calculating exactly how many seconds it would take to neutralize him. "Mr. Park," she said. Her voice was smooth, but her tone was a barricade. "I've reviewed your transit routes for the next 48 hours. 3 are compromised by construction and narrow alleyways. We changed them tonight. I didn't hire you to rewrite my life, Miss Blackwell," Do-yoon replied, stepping into her personal space. He wanted to see her flinch. Most people did when the heir of the Park Syndicate stood close enough to smell their fear. Serena didn't move. She didn't even blink. "You hired me to keep you alive. My schedule, my rules. If you want a puppet who says yes, hire a valet. If you want to see tomorrow, listen to me." The room went silent. The guard shifted, expecting Do-yoon to snap. Instead, a slow, dangerous curiosity sparked in his chest. He had spent his life surrounded by sycophants who polished his ego until it bled. This woman looked at him like he was a problem to be solved, a high-value asset that needed securing. Over the following months, friction became their only language. He challenged her at every turn, dragging her to high-stakes galas and back-alley meetings, testing her patience. He watched her move through crowded ballrooms, a predatory grace hidden beneath a gown, her hand never more than an inch from her concealed holster. He found himself watching the way her jaw tightened when he took unnecessary risks, the way she could transition from calm to lethal in a heartbeat. It wasn't just her skill that fascinated him. It was the ironclad soul that refused to bend for his money or his name. He was the heir to an empire, but as he watched her silhouette against the Seoul skyline night after night, Do-yoon realized he was the one being conquered. The rain in Seoul was a thin, cold veil the night the world ended. They had just slipped out of a summit that had felt more like a funeral, the tension within the Park Syndicate reaching a boiling point. Serena had insisted on pulling the car around herself, a standard security sweep that Do-yoon had teased her about only moments before. 5 minutes, Do-yoon, she'd said, her hand lingering on his arm for a fraction of a second longer than protocol allowed. It was a silent promise, a rare moment where the bodyguard and the heir vanished, leaving only two people caught in a dangerous orbit. He had watched her walk toward the black sedan, her silhouette sharp against the neon haze. He was reaching into his pocket for a lighter when the air ignited. The roar wasn't just a sound. It was a physical blow that threw Do-yoon across the wet asphalt. Shrapnel hissed through the air like angry hornets. When he managed to lift his head, gasping for oxygen that had been scorched away by the blast, the sedan was already a skeletal cage of orange and black fire. Serena! Her name was a raw, jagged thing in his throat. He tried to scramble toward the inferno, his hands outspread as if he could peel the flames away with his bare fingers, but his own men swarmed him. They pinned his arms, dragging him back into the safety of the shadows as the secondary fuel tank blew, sending a fresh wave of heat into the night. To Do-yoon, the destruction was absolute. He watched the roof of the car buckle into the seats. He watched the light of his life turn into an incandescent pyre. He fell to his knees, a king brought to dust, believing he was witnessing her cremation. Inside the wreckage, the world was a distorted symphony of ringing metal and searing agony. Serena was pinned against the door, the left side of her body a map of white-hot pain. The smell of her own scorched tactical gear and singed hair filled the small, oxygen-starved space. Through a spiderweb of shattered, blood-stained glass, she saw him. Do-yoon was standing 50 feet away. In the flickering, hellish light of the fire, she saw his silhouette. She saw him turn. She saw him move away, surrounded by his suit-clad shadows. She tried to scream, to tell him she was still there, to beg him to reach through the heat, but her lungs were full of soot and her voice was gone. To her, he wasn't being dragged away by his security for his own protection. He was walking away from the mess his life had made of hers. He was leaving her to burn in the trap meant for him. As her vision began to gray out, the door didn't yield to firemen or a grieving husband. Heavy, gloved hands reached into the heat. She wasn't being rescued. She was being harvested. As the darkness finally took her, the last thing she felt wasn't the warmth of his arms, but the cold, crushing weight of a betrayal that would take 5 years to bloom into a blade. The safe house was a concrete bunker disguised as a luxury villa, tucked into the jagged cliffs of the Incheon coast. Serena sat in a heavy oak chair, her wrists zip-tied not out of cruelty, but because Do-yoon knew she could still kill him with a dinner fork. She watched him move. The pristine suit was gone, replaced by a black shirt with the sleeves rolled up, revealing faint, jagged scars on his forearms from that night's flying glass. He didn't bring out a tray of blades or a car battery. He brought a stack of weathered, overstuffed dossiers and a tablet. "Kill me and get it over with, Do-yoon," she spat, her voice like gravel. "I know how the Park family handles failures. I'm just sorry I missed your heart." Do-yoon didn't flinch. He sat across from her, the table between them a wasteland of 5 years of secrets. "You think I'm the one who failed?" he asked softly. He slid a photograph across the table. It was a man, his face unrecognizable, slumped in a chair in a dark basement. "That was the man who sold the plastic explosives to the Shadow Directorate. It took me 14 months to find him. I didn't stop until his heart stopped." He slid a ledger. "This is the bank trail. I spent $300 million tracking the ghost who drove the getaway car. I found him in Marseille. He told me you were dead before I burned his house down." Serena's eyes flickered to the documents, her training warring with the sudden, cold hollow in her chest. "Lies! You walked away. I saw you. You let them take me. I was dragged away, Serena," he countered, his voice cracking. He stood and walked to her, leaning down until they were eye to eye. He didn't look like the king of Seoul. He looked like a man who had lived in a cemetery for half a decade. He turned the tablet toward her. It was a video loop from a grainy security camera across from the hotel, hidden for years in a police archive he'd had to buy with blood. Serena watched as the explosion bloomed. She saw the man, Do-yoon, screaming, fighting against 4 security guards who were literally carrying him away while he clawed at the air, his face a mask of such raw, unbridled agony that it made her own scars ache. He hadn't walked away. He had been a prisoner of his own protection, struggling until he collapsed into the asphalt. "I didn't bury a wife because it was convenient," he whispered, his hand hovering near her face but never touching. "I buried the world because I thought I'd lost my soul. Tell me, Serena, who told you I wanted you dead?" The silence that followed was louder than the bomb. For the first time in 5 years, the tactical precision in Serena's gaze faltered, replaced by the terrifying realization that she hadn't been a weapon of justice, but a puppet of the very men who had tried to cremate her alive. Her defiance didn't vanish, but it fractured, revealing the wounded woman beneath the tactical silk. The silence of the cliffside villa didn't break, it shattered. A rhythmic thud-thud-thud of suppressed gunfire chewed through the front door, just as the floor-to-ceiling windows disintegrated into 1,000 crystalline teeth. Do-yoon didn't think, he lunged. He tackled Serena's chair, sent it crashing to the floor as a hail of lead shredded the air where her head had been a second before. "Sang-ho!" Do-yoon hissed, his eyes catching the tactical insignia on the intruder's shoulders. The betrayal felt like a secondary explosion in his chest. His second in command, the man who had physically dragged him away from the burning car 5 years ago, wasn't just there to claim the throne. He was there to finish the job the fire had started. Do-yoon reached for the small of his back, pulling a serrated blade from his waistband. He didn't move toward the door. He moved toward Serena. "If you're going to kill me, do it after we clear this room," he grunted, the blade slicing through her zip ties in one fluid motion. "There's a suppressed cig in the kitchen island, 3rd drawer. Go!" Serena didn't hesitate. The moment her wrists were free, the ghost vanished. She rolled through the glass shards, her scuffed tactical gear blending into the shadows of the hallway. Do-yoon drew his own weapon, and suddenly the air changed. The suffocating weight of 5 years of grief evaporated, replaced by the lethal, electric hum of their old rhythm. They moved through the villa like a single, predatory organism. It was a language only they spoke, the tilt of a shoulder to signal a blind spot, the weight of a hand on a lower back to indicate a breach. When Serena rounded a corner and came face to face with a mercenary, Do-yoon was already there, his larger frame providing the shield she needed to take the shot. Muscle memory was a terrifying, beautiful thing, Her hands knew the weight of his cover, and his eyes knew the precise timing of her kill shots. They ended up back to back in the smoke-filled kitchen, the heat of their bodies radiating through their clothes. It was the closest they had been in half a decade, their breathing synchronized as if they were sharing a single set of lungs. "You're late on the left flank," Serena whispered, her voice a low vibration against his spine. "I was busy saving your life." "Again," Do-yoon countered, a ghost of a smirk pulling at his tense jaw. In the center of the carnage, amidst the smell of cordite and sea salt, the fire sparked. It wasn't just adrenaline. It was the realization that despite the lies, the bombs, and the years of blood, the only place either of them felt truly alive was standing in the wreckage, guarding each other's souls. Serena didn't turn around, but she leaned back into his solid weight for a fraction of a second, acknowledging the truth. The king and his shadow were back. The smoke from the firefight settled into the vents, leaving the kitchen smelling of burnt ozone and copper. Do-yoon watched Serena as she checked her weapon, her movements mechanical and devoid of the warmth they'd shared just seconds ago. The adrenaline had faded, leaving behind the raw, jagged edges of a truth that had been 5 years in the making. "They didn't just heal me, Do-yoon," Serena said, her voice barely a whisper against the sound of the crashing waves outside. She didn't look at him. She looked at the blood on her knuckles, her expression distant, as if she were staring into a white-tiled room miles and years away. "The Shadow Directorate, they kept me in a basement for 6 months. No windows. Just a screen and a voice that never stopped." She finally met his gaze, and the agony there made his lungs seize. "They showed me the contracts. The ones your father drafted for the political merger with the Hong family. They showed me the recordings of you meeting with their daughter just 3 days before the blast. They told me I was the security risk that stood in the way of your ascension. They said you chose the throne over the bodyguard who knew too many of your sins." Do-yoon felt a cold sweat break across his neck. He remembered those meetings. They had been a desperate, secret attempt to buy his way out of the arrangement his father had brokered, to pay whatever price was necessary to marry a woman who wasn't a pawn. He had kept it from Serena to protect her from the filth of his family's politics, believing he could shield her from the darkness by keeping her in the dark. "I kept those meetings a secret so I could fix it without worrying you," he said, the words tasting like ash. "Your secrets were the soil they planted their hate in," Serena countered, her voice hardening. "Every time I tried to remember your face, they played a clip of you lying to me about where you were going. Every time I felt a spark of love, they reminded me that you never once searched the rubble. They spent 4 years turning my grief into a weapon, sharpening me until I was nothing but a blade meant for your throat." Do-yoon closed his eyes, the weight of his own arrogance crushing him. He had thought silence was a shield. He had believed that if he waded through the mud alone, her hands would stay clean. Instead, he had handed his enemies the blueprints to destroy her soul. He had provided the shadows, and the Directorate had simply filled them with monsters. "They didn't just train me to kill you, Do-yoon," she said, her voice finally breaking. "They made me want to. They made the man I loved into the monster who set me on fire." The old Park estate was a graveyard of scorched stone and ashen silence. Do-yoon led her through the skeletal remains of the West Wing, his footsteps heavy on the floorboards that still smelled of ancient smoke. He stopped before a heavy, reinforced door that had survived the blast, a room he had kept sealed like a tomb. "I couldn't live in the house," he said, his voice a hollow echo. "But I couldn't leave the memory." He punched a code into a keypad caked in dust. The door hissed open, revealing a study that was frozen in time. While the rest of the world had moved on for 5 years, this room had remained in the grip of the night. They were torn apart. On the desk sat a mountain of envelopes, thousands of them, stacked in chronological towers that threatened to topple. Serena approached the desk, her tactical boots loud against the pristine rug. Her hands, still trembling from the revelations at the safe house, reached out for a yellowed envelope at the top of the nearest pile. It was dated exactly 1 year after the explosion. Day 365. It began in Do-yoon's sharp, precise script. The police have stopped looking. The world says you are dust. But I spent this morning at the harbor, watching the tide, wondering if the water knows where you are. I burned a rival warehouse today. I thought it would make the fire in my chest go out. It only made me miss the way you used to scold me for being reckless. She dropped the letter, her breath hitching, and grabbed another from a pile near the middle. Day 1042. I saw a woman today who walked like you. For 3 seconds, I forgot how to breathe. Then she turned around, and the world went gray again. Why didn't you take me with you, Serena? Serena's knees hit the floor. The training, from the directorate, the loops of his voice they had distorted, the images of him smiling at other women, began to crack and peel away like cheap paint. These weren't the words of a man who had ordered a hit. These were the frantic, bleeding screams of a soul that had been wandering in the dark for 1800 days. She tore into another, and another, the paper rustling like the wings of 1,000 trapped birds. Each one was a confession. Each one was a prayer. She saw her name written over and over until the ink blurred beneath the first hot tear that escaped her eyes. The directorate had told her he had forgotten her name. The letters told her he had made it his only religion. I didn't just search for your killers, Serena, Do-yoon whispered, kneeling behind her, but not daring to touch the tactical gear that still marked her as a weapon. I talked to you. Every single night. I told you about the city, about the gardens I wanted to build for you, about how much I hated the throne without my shadow. The last wall of her programming shattered. The cold, efficient assassin was gone, leaving only the woman who had been loved by a king. She turned, burying her face in the charcoal silk of his shirt, her sobs breaking the 5-year silence of the room. He finally wrapped his arms around her, pulling her into the wreckage of his heart, and for the first time since the fire, the ghosts were still. Serena stood amidst the wreckage of the letters, but the grief had been forged into a cold, diamond-hard resolve. She didn't just want to survive. She wanted to dismantle the machine that had turned her into a ghost. She stood up, the tactical gear creaking as she adjusted her posture, her eyes losing their glassiness and regaining their surgical, predatory focus. The directorate doesn't have a traditional headquarters, she said, her voice dropping into the low, rhythmic register of a mission briefing. They have nodes, but every node feeds back to a single heartbeat, a black site medical facility hidden beneath a decommissioned ship-breaking yard in Ulsan. It's where they process their assets. It's where they kept me. Do-yoon stood, watching the transition. The woman he had tried to shield for half a decade was gone, replaced by the elite specialist he had first hired. Only now, she was battle-hardened and fueled by a righteous, personal fury. He didn't offer a suggestion. He didn't try to take the map from her hands. He simply cleared the desk of his grief and waited. Tell me what you need, he said, his voice steady. Serena pulled a tablet from her tactical vest, syncing it to the room's hidden monitors. She spread out blueprints of the Ulsan facility, her fingers tracing the thermal cycling vents and the blind spots in the automated turret arrays. She explained their rotation schedules, the frequency of their encrypted panic alarms, and the exact psychological profile of the handlers who would be guarding the exit. She was no longer an assassin sent to settle a debt. She was a general mapping out the death of an empire. They think they own my triggers, she said, looking at Do-yoon with a chilling, quiet confidence. But they forgot that I was a high-level security consultant before I was their weapon. I know the holes in their perimeter because I'm the one who would have designed them. Do-yoon picked up his encrypted phone, dialing his most loyal commanders, the few who had remained true despite Sang-ho's betrayal. I have a new primary, he told them, his eyes never leaving Serena's. Her word is my own. If she tells you to burn a building, you bring the gasoline. If she tells you to hold, you become stone. The power dynamic shifted irrevocably in that darkened study. For the first time, Do-yoon wasn't the king shielding a pawn. They were two blades crossing in the night, perfectly aligned. He watched her work, marveling at the lethal intellect he had once tried to save by keeping it in the dark. He had spent 5 years mourning her strength. Now, he was following it. As they began to load their weapons and synchronize their watches, Do-yoon realized that he had spent his life wanting a wife to protect, but he had found a partner to conquer the world with. The Ulsan shipbreaking yard was a skeletal landscape of rusted iron and salt spray, illuminated by the flickering strobe of a thunderstorm. Beneath the colossal hulls of dying tankers, the Directorate's black site breathed, a sterile, subterranean hive of white light and cold steel. They hit the perimeter like a scalpel. Serena was the edge, her movements a silent, terrifying dance of suppressed muzzle flashes and broken shadows. Do-yoon was the weight, his heavy-caliber rounds providing the thunder that kept the enemy pinned in their own fear. As they breached the central processing level, the place where Serena's soul had been dismantled, the air grew thick with the smell of ozone and burned electronics. Serena moved with a frantic, focused grace, her eyes locked on the server hub that held the programming for dozens of other ghosts. She was inches from the console when the room's automated defense system hissed into life. Hidden behind reinforced panels, a high-velocity turret pivoted, its thermal lens locking onto the heat signature of Serena's heart. She was mid-stride, exposed in a corridor of glass and light. She didn't see the red laser center on her spine. Do-yoon saw it. The world shifted into a distorted, slow-motion nightmare. The hum of the ship-breaking yard faded, replaced by the ghost roar of a car bomb from 5 years ago. The heat of the fire, the smell of scorched asphalt, the feeling of being dragged away while she burned, it all rushed back in an incandescent wave. "Serena!" He didn't scream her name as a plea this time. He screamed it as a command to the universe. He didn't wait for his security to pull him back. He lunged. He threw himself across the gap, his larger frame eclipsing the woman who had become his only son. The turret fired, a jagged, mechanical staccato. The rounds chewed into the heavy ceramic plating of Do-yoon's tactical vest, the force of the impact spinning him around as he tackled Serena into a reinforced alcove. They hit the floor in a tangle of limbs and gasping breath. For a terrifying second, silence returned. Serena scrambled over him, her hands frantically searching for the blood she feared would be there. Her eyes were wide, the cold assassin's mask shattered by the raw terror of losing him again. "Do-yoon? Look at me!" He coughed, the air returning to his lungs in a sharp, painful rasp. He looked up at her, his teeth gritted against the bruising weight of the impact, but his eyes were clear. "I'm here," he whispered, his hand catching hers as she reached for his shoulder. "I'm not walking away this time." She didn't cry. There was still work to be done, but she pressed her forehead against his for one singular, heartbeat second. 5 years ago, the fire had won. Tonight, they were the fire. Serena stood, offering him her hand to pull him up, and together they turned toward the server core to finish the job. This time, they weren't survivors of a tragedy. They were the architects of their own redemption. The headlines in Seoul were screams of fire and ash. "The King of the Shadows is dead." The explosion at the Ulsan shipbreaking yard had been so absolute that the authorities found nothing but twisted metal and the melted remains of a signet ring that had once dictated the flow of billions. Sang-ho and the traders were gone, consumed by the very darkness they had tried to usurp. The Park Syndicate had been decapitated, its ledgers burned, and its secrets buried under 1,000,000 tons of saltwater and stone. 6 months later, the only sound was the rhythmic, peaceful hushing of the Aegean Sea. Serena sat on a whitewashed terrace, her skin glowing warm beneath a loose linen shirt that had never felt the weight of a holster. The tactical gear was gone, buried in a past life along with the masks and the programming. In its place was the simple, staggering luxury of a quiet afternoon. The scars on her shoulder and side were fading from angry red to a soft silver, a map of where she had been, but no longer a definition of who she was. Do-yoon stepped out from the house, carrying 2 glasses of iced tea. He wore no tie, no sharp charcoal suit, and no armor. He looked younger, the deep lines of grief around his eyes smoothed by the salt air and the absence of a crown. He sat beside her, his hand finding hers with an ease that had taken months of patient healing to reclaim. "The reports say the syndicate has been fully dismantled," he said softly, his gaze fixed on the horizon where the sun was beginning to melt into the liquid blue. "The name Park Do-yoon is nothing more than a ghost story told to keep young heirs in line. A cautionary tale of an empire that vanished in a single night." Serena squeezed his hand, her thumb tracing the bare skin where his signet ring used to rest. "And Serena Blackwell? A shadow that evaporated in the smoke," he replied. He turned to her, and for the first time in 6 years, there was no calculation in his eyes. No threat assessment. No cold ice. Just the man who had written 3,000 letters to a woman he thought he'd lost to the flames. "We're just people now, Serena. No king. No shadow. Just us." They watched the sky turn from brilliant gold to a bruised, beautiful purple, the same colors as the neon of Seoul, but without the static and the blood. They had spent their lives guarding things, power, secrets, and high-value assets. Now, the only thing they had to protect was the silence between them. As the last sliver of the sun dipped below the water, Serena leaned her head on his shoulder, finally closing her eyes. The fire was out, the letters were finished, and for the first time in their lives, the world was exactly the right size.